tea, Earl Grey, hot.
I can't
Welcome back to Continual and another round of fandom, where tonight we're going to be talking all about Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we've beamed aboard a handful of friends to come on and a couple of potential invaders here. We never know because it's always one of the guest stars. Let's see who has joined us on this week's excursion to help bring in a little mayhem. So, Wendy, you are up first.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Van Camp. I'm a speculative poet and a science fiction writer. I mainly, really more of a poet these days. I just had an anthology of poetry come out. I'm the editor of Eccentric Orbits, which is an annual anthology of science fiction poetry, available pretty much anywhere where books are sold. And I have a sci-fi coup book called The Planets, and sci-fi coup is science fiction themed haiku. You can just find that on Amazon as well, and you can find everything on my my website if you care to look. And that's about it.
Mrs. Carr.
Howdy, y'all. Live long and prosper. I am the one, the only, the R.E. Carr, or Rachel to my friends, and Jim. I'll let him call me that. I am a lifelong Trekkie whose dream, even though I'm but a humble urban fantasy and science fiction author, is to one day write in the Star Trek universe. And you can find me anywhere online at Total Recar. If you get my handle, you'll understand my books. You can also find me online at www.rachelecar.com because the other Rachel Carr writes vegan cookbooks.
Doc Coleman, how are you doing, sir?
I am doing well. I am Doc Coleman. I write steampunk comedy adventure. But I also grew up on Star Trek, the original series, and I've followed through The Next Generation and Voyager and Deep Space Nine. I'll admit that I haven't breached the paywall to see the newer series, but I'm sure that's going to happen eventually. If you're interested in my steampunky goodness, then you can go to your favorite search engine and search for Doc Coleman Steampunk. You'll find my website at doccoleman.com. You'll also be able to find my Amazon author page where you can subscribe to all my future works, and you can read my current publishing and see if they're right for you or someone you love.
Mrs. Dunn.
I had forgotten I'd muted. I was about to just start talking. I'm Nancy E. Dunn. I am primarily a fantasy author, more high fantasy than I like more fi in my sci, but I have been a Trekkie since way back. I was one of those that didn't want to watch TNG because how could it be any better than the original series? I have now eaten those words 1,000 times over since then. But I forgot what else I needed to tell you about myself. I'm wearing a Starfleet shirt because, of course, I am. And I just had a book come out yesterday in my urban fantasy duology, the finale to that, because I really want to get back to my fantasy roots. This urban fantasy stuff, I'm going to leave it to y'all that do it well, because I don't. And maybe one day there will be a Star Trekky type thing. I wouldn't ever think I could write for Star Trek. I'm going to leave that to you, Rachel. I'm assuming I can call you Rachel, but I love to read it and watch it and all the things. And I'm on Amazon. Most of my stuff is on Amazon.
Lola.
My name's Lola Lariscy, although occasionally you'll listen to me with the last name Strickland. That's my father's last name. It's boring, but whatever. I've been watching Star Trek since I was a teenager. Now, I watched a little bit of the original series, but I was like, whatevs. But then The Next Generation hit, and I was like, oh my God, I love this. What's going on? Oh my God, I love this so much. And then I became a super fan and all things Star Trek, and my life was laid out for the rest of my life.
Misty.
I am Misty Massey. I'm the author of the Mad Kestrel series of pirate fantasy adventures. I am an editor for Falstaff Books, Lore Seekers Press, Mocha Memoirs Press, and occasionally for anybody who wants to throw money in my direction to be punished on purpose. And when I'm not writing or doing words, I play the cheerful sun-drenched cleric Malibu on the Calamity Jane's podcast, sister show to the Authors and Dragons podcast. I too am a lifelong Star Trek fan, and I still think I love TNG, but I still think that Sulu, when he was in the grip of the Naked Now, was the sexiest thing walking the planet. So,
And David.
I'm David R. Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Binder Urban Fantasy series. The first one's White Trash Warlock. The second one is Trailer Park Trickster. And the third one is Deadbeat Druid. I also have my first high fantasy, Dark Moon Shallow Sea, coming out from also with Blackstone Publishing on Halloween this year. And I have got a gay, geeky rom-com called To Catch a Geek coming out on the KISS app in June. I thought I'd try something a little different, and it's full of geeky references, including lots of Trek, of course. I grew up in a trailer in the woods outside of Guthrie, Oklahoma, with a very religious mother who would not let me watch anything having to do with magic or fantasy. But she had a real soft spot for Star Trek, and we watched it every night on Channel 34, Monday through Friday at 6:00. So I grew up on TOS. Again, had it all memorized by a certain age and was around when TNG came out and loved it. So lifelong Trekkie and just still along for the ride and love it. Love them all. Everything they've done so far.
So since we're here to talk about TNG, and being somebody that was raised on the original series and the animated series and, the films, and of course, believing that Wrath of Khan is the supreme absolute pinnacle of all science fiction film, I will openly admit, Next Gen hits, and I had a bunch of friends who were like, "Aren't you going to watch Next Gen?" And we sat and I was skeptical. Let's go with that. When we took a look at it, I might have heckled a little bit at some of the stuff in Farpoint, but obviously it did not take long to find its footing with me. But I think we kind of see and knowing that even in those days, there was not a lot of belief that they were going to get even through their first half a season, right? So I think it's acceptable to see that they had a longer range plan. They just had to bat 1,000 to get there. So I want to kind of start with, how did you get your first exposure to Next Gen? And when you got it, what was that hook for you that made you say, okay, yeah, I'm going to stay with this? So, Wendy, you're on mute.
There we go. I started with TOS too. I basically started watching it with my father when I was maybe 3 or 4. I mean, I was very small, and I loved it. I was just, it was like my favorite show ever. And then I watched the movies, just as Jim mentioned, and I even liked the motion sickness, believe it or not. Then when Star Trek Next Gen came, I mean, I was all ready for it. I wanted more Star Trek. I was excited. And then I saw Encounter at Farpoint and went, oh my God, what did they do? This is bad. But I just kept watching because, at that time period, there was not a lot of science fiction on television. Maybe a few here and there, but really, this was kind of it. And I was a hardcore science fiction reader at that point, and I was really desperate to watch anything of a science fiction nature. So I stuck with it, and gradually the writing got better, the characters got better, the acting was wonderful, and it found its legs. And of course, now here's history. It's a top show in the science fiction genre. So, and really in pop culture in general. So
Rachel? Yeah. Since I see the cattail flickering.
Yes, I was briefly attacked by a chiton while trying to talk. There she goes again. She's just gone to the other side. See, I am from a slightly different generation. My first exposure, while I did see the original series and the animated series, was in reruns after school. And I did see The Wrath of Khan. That was from another panel, but it was a very traumatic experience because I was only 5 years old in the theater, and the earwigs have lived in my brain for eternity. So I was just, a wee lass when The Next Generation started. And so some of the nuances and subtleties of good writing, I wasn't quite there yet. So I really enjoyed Next Generation. It had a character that was roughly my age. It had, Will Wheaton as Wesley Crusher, even though by the end of the second season, I too was like, shut up, Wesley. And it had my favorite character instantly, who was Data, when I watched the show. So I was of that. You know how they always say it's like that first one you watch initially kind of sticks with you? And that was Next Generation to me. And I had to live through the longest summer in history, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, which was the season 3 finale of Star Trek The Next Generation. I still remember that feeling of waiting to find out what happened after Will Riker said fire to the Borg cube and Locutus was on there. So yeah, it's definitely the Star Trek that I started with, officially.
Doc?
Okay, so the question was, what was my first exposure to Star Trek The Next Generation? And that was when they decided that they were going to broadcast the pilot, the Journey to Farpoint first episode, because as has already been mentioned, it was a bit of a sci-fi wasteland at the time. Battlestar Galactica had come and gone. Star Trek had been in endless reruns, and people were starting to look around for something else to put in its place. And the fact that they were, doing a new generation was great. I mean, we enjoyed the movies, but they were a little campy, and the cast was obviously getting old. So, I felt ready to see what they could do with the new cast, and they got some things good. They needed a whole lot of work with the writing, but it was also a time when someone would put out a new series and you'd say, all right, I'll give them the first season and see how it goes. As opposed to now, where it's you've got till the first commercial break or I'm changing the channel.
Commercial break?
Yeah, I know some people don't make it that far. But the admittedly, the expectations were kind of lower back then. And if you were looking for sci-fi, you took what you could get, because the networks were just really didn't understand why anyone would want to watch this junk.
Nancy?
Well, I said that I was a big fan of the original series. I did watch it in reruns, and watched it every day and recorded it on my VCR and could quote all the episodes. And I saw, my husband and I have this running thing about which movies I've seen, because keep in mind that I was young then and I couldn't go see movies without my parents going with me. And there was no way that my preacher father was going to take me to see Star Trek, because he wasn't interested in it at all, nor was my mother. So the first movie I saw, I think, was at it was the Star Trek, the movie, which I thought was great at the time, but I was a kid. And then I remember going to see 4. That's my favorite one. That's the one with the whales. Love that one. But didn't think it could get any better. And I skipped TNG when it first came out, and I beg forgiveness for that, because I was starting college and we didn't have cable. We didn't have streaming. If you wanted a television, you took your little black and white TV, and so I didn't see it when it first came out. And then when I came back home and people were all talking about it, and I was like, nah, it'll never go anywhere. No, Star Trek is complete. It is fine. And then I started watching it later in my adult years, and I think I watched the entire run like several times over, just in a row. And I watched it every time it came on, in syndication. And I still will put on BBC America when I'm in the summer, when I'm not at Clemson and I'm working, and have it in the background. And but yeah, I didn't know what I was missing. I will say that TNG is not my absolute favorite iteration, but it's pretty high up there because it brought me Worf. And I'm probably just going to leave it at that and remute the microphone.
All right, the pain sticks are out. Lola, how about you?
Well, all right, I'm going to put a little wrench in this. So I was in college also when The Next Generation started, and it was actually syndicated. So I would take I didn't watch any TV, but I had a little tiny black and white TV. And I would plug it in the wall on Saturdays at 9 p.m. and watch The Next Generation. And that's the only thing I watched. And I would plug it in, and I would end up having to hit it because it would kind of go in and out. But that's how I watched The Next Generation. And I loved that damn show. I did it, I was a little too young for the original series. I was born in 1971, so it's not like I didn't have it around me, but I was too young to really appreciate it. I just didn't, it wasn't in my orbit. My mother didn't watch it. My dad didn't watch it. So it just was not in my orbit. But when The Next Generation started, I started watching it and I was like, oh my God, I love this. I mean, you got Picard, he drinks Earl Grey and he has a British accent, even though he's supposed to be French. Who knows what's up with that? Never really made sense to me.
No question.
Cross the river, it's fine.
Picard season 2 actually explains it.
All right, so somebody's got to, when it's your turn, you got to explain it because I'm sure it did. I just don't remember. So yeah, I watched it when I wasn't watching anything else except for, that was all I was watching, and I'd have to plug it in on Saturday nights and hit it to get the antennas to work. And that's my Star Trek Next Generation story.
Misty?
See, I find it fascinating that you guys are going, well, Farpoint was really terrible, but I stuck around anyway because I was 24 when it came out. We were so blissed out at the idea of more Star Trek, we couldn't even sit still. We were walking this far up off the ground for weeks ahead of time because at that point, all we'd had was Battlestar Garbesia and Buck Rogers. And I'm sorry, but Farpoint compared to those is freaking Oscar nomination worthy. So, yes, it had issues. It was a pilot, but we were so excited. We all of my friends, we were just out of college, for a couple of years and living on our own. So we all gathered at my house because I had the biggest great room, even though the TV was not big, because this was way before the days of the big flat screen TV. So it was, the honky round TVs that sat on the floor. But we all gathered and we were sitting on the floor watching and just gobsmacked. We were all so excited. And the next week we did the same thing again. And for the whole first season, we gathered every week and watched the new Star Trek and got to where we chose who we loved. And it was so wonderful. And so I remember being so excited that when it got renewed, because it was like, yay, I get more Star Trek. Hooray. Who knew it would blow up into the behemoth it's become, but
yeah.
But
David?
that was me.
Oh. David?
My experience is similar. I was a kid. I fell in love with it. I can go back. I went back recently and started a rewatch, and yeah, I found all the weak spots in season 1, like Space Wakanda. But
oh my God!
But you know what? I didn't cringe at it at all. I was madly in love with it. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And for us in Oklahoma, it was syndicated as well, and I was able to set the VCR if I couldn't stay up late enough to watch it, because it would come on at like midnight. It'd come on the weirdest hours. And so I'd have to, if I couldn't get the VCR timer to work, I'd have to stay up, hit record, go to bed, and then find it, like rewind the whole tape and then find the place. So no, I was madly in love with it. And I'm also against the grain in that I loved Wesley. He was my age, like here's maybe a little bit older. Like here's this kid out in space. He's smart. He's a genius. And, I'm like, nerdy gay boy in Oklahoma, like, yay, nerd kids. So yeah, I unabashedly loved it and have absolutely no shame in it. I started to write a Star Trek novel. I was so excited. It's the first book I tried to write, and a lot of that love came from TNG.
So, looking at, 7 seasons, all the movies we've got, looking at, even spinning off into Picard, finally getting back into that universe after a couple of years. Looking at the breadth and then what TNG was able to kick back off and really create both the universes we got that were all kind of in universe during that period of time, plus all the stuff we have going now on Paramount and streaming and everything else. I don't think anybody really could have said, okay, yeah, we can see this coming, because we had that another desert of no Trek for a number of years. So when we think about looking at Next Gen, and we look at some of the iconic storylines, some of those iconic things, what's the one that just solidified for you? And Rachel, I'm going to let you go first because I already know where you're going. But what was the iconic storyline that just set for you that pushed you over the edge?
I mean, totally. Season 1, Code of Honor, the greatest episode. Space Wakanda, right, guys? I mean, everyone would agree that's the finest. No.
If it was Space Wakanda, it would have been a lot better. But
it would have been. But no, the storyline of all storylines, everyone I know who was a sci-fi nerd of my generation, it was the end of season 3. You've just met the Borg because earlier in season 2, because Q knocked them off into the Delta Quadrant and showed this terrifying, unknowable existential force you couldn't bargain with. And the show did something that at the time was shocking. Its main character, its captain, was captured. And this was before the internet, where you knew if this British stage actor who was probably miserable in LA was going to actually stay on the show. So the episode ends with the Borg capturing Captain Picard, and he comes out and says, "I am the cutest of Borg. Resistance is futile." And then Riker's like, "Nope, we're going to shoot this ship." And he says fire. And you had to wait 3 whole agonizing months of no real internet, no spoilers, no guessing, no idea to find out what happened at the beginning of season 4. And it shaped a lot of us. If you ever want to know how to do a cliffhanger, I always say watch The Best of Both Worlds Part 1. And, it was a great whole arc because it paid off so many things that seemed like gimmicks that were set up in season 1 or 2, like the saucer and the battle section being able to separate into 2 ships. It gave Riker something to do besides be on the away team and, Mac on the local women. Worf still got knocked out, but he's Worf. That's his job. And Data got to do stuff. Like, everyone got to do things. Even Dr. Crusher, in most of Star Trek The Next Generation, she didn't get to do much, but she got to do stuff in this storyline. And it was just, that's where the hooks dug into my brain. And I knew that I was going to watch this show ride or die till its end. Except for that Shades of Grey when the writer's strike happened. We don't talk about that either.
Nah.
So, Doc, how about you?
So what was the question again?
Well, looking at some of the epic storylines and some of the, the stories, what's one that just really settled for you? Something that you remember to this day that you're not going to forget, you're not going to let go
basically,
of.
What's the most memorable episode?
Yeah.
Okay, that's easy to answer. Unfortunately, I don't remember the actual name of the episode, but I refer to it as Wharf Across Space-Time. It's the episode where he's gone off to the Batleth tournament and he's coming back in a shuttlecraft, and it's like just about every few minutes he slips into a parallel universe, and that was just beautifully done in terms of building up building up the exchanges and all the different changes that they made, and where they went with it, in terms of having the Enterprise from the universe where the Borg had taken over everything, saying, "No, we don't want to go back. Stop." And just also so much that there were so many things about Worf that just made him so staid and boring. And when you got to see some of the other lives that Worf lived, Worf became a much more interesting character. And one almost gets the feeling that Worf became more interesting to himself when he started to realize some of the possibilities he was passing up. So that's definitely one of my favorites.
Ancy, how about you?
Well, first to glom onto that for a second, that's one of the best examples of how Star Trek has taught me to sit on all the delicious little parts I know about my story that are coming later, so that nobody knows them until the end, and then they're like, oh, I saw that. That's one of those episodes where you spend the whole time going, what the heck is going on? Why is he anyway. My absolute favorite one is kind of a niche thing for me. What I do at Clemson in my day job is I'm a sign language interpreter. So the episode Loud as a Whisper is my absolute favorite episode. End all. I mean, I will stop everything I'm doing if I see it come up on the TV when I'm doing other things. I loved some of it now that I sign better than I did the first time I saw it. Some of it I'm like, yikes. And some of it has not aged well in terms of showing people with disabilities in a positive light. But the way that he has the trio, that absolutely explains what I do as an interpreter. I mean, I am all those people wrapped into one. I thought that was fascinating. And every time I watch it, I see something new coming from the trio that I'm like, oh yeah, I do that. If you're not as familiar as I am with this one little episode, it's the one where they get the mediator for the two groups down on the planet, and he is deaf and has a trio that actually voices for him. And it's just so well done. And when he loses his trio and they have to figure out how to negotiate communication between them, all of that is so well done. And now when I watch it, I can turn the volume off. I don't need the trio. And that makes my little nerd heart happy, because I'm like, I understand you. So I really, really love that episode. That, I think, where I was like, because when that came out, that was kind of a Renaissance period, a short little Renaissance period for everybody was having deaf characters on things. And everybody was showing sign language, and sign language was cool. And the fact that they actually used a deaf actor also means a lot to my little interpreter heart, because there's no way that a hearing actor, I think, could have shown the depth of emotion that he did when he lost his trio. So that side of Star Trek was really kind of ignited for me, that it's all about space, and it's all about the Borg, and it's all about all these battles and all this technology, but it's also the humanity that remains in that far-flung future. That's one thing I really love about Star Trek.
Lola?
So this is not going to be as intellectual and profound as what anyone else would say, but it's what stuck with me, and it's what stuck with a lot of people I know. Tasha Yar and Data. Wow. He is a fully functioning being with all the fully functioning parts. He's no Ken doll, and he's going to show Tasha. He's a man with a mission. So that stood the test of time. I don't care what year it was. If someone mentioned Star Trek Next Generation, I was like, fully functioning human, So.
Misty?
One of the things that I liked about TNG was that they actually committed to the Prime Directive in a way that TOS never really did. Kirk would go around saying, "Oh, Prime Directive," but he never actually followed it. Picard did, and in the first season, the episode Symbiosis. I absolutely love it. It's the planet of the system of the drug dealer planet and the drug addicted planet, and the drug addicted people have all been convinced that they have a plague, and that only the drug dealers can save them from the plague, and so they've sent everything that every dime they have to the drug dealer planet so that they can live in comfort. And at the end, their freighters are all breaking down, and so in order to keep their exchange going, Picard has originally said that he would send coils to fix their freighters, and when they're getting ready to leave, he says, "No, you're not taking the coils; they're staying here." And the drug dealers say, "What about your prime directive? You can't interfere." And he says, you didn't mind the prime directive when it was working in your favor." And I thought, oh, that's so slick. At the time, it was so new because Kirk would never have done that. Kirk would have just gone and romanced the blonde drug dealer lady and convinced her to give the drugs to the people, and they'd have been gone. But this way, Picard actually embraced the prime directive, which is such a huge deal in Star Trek, and it was never properly dealt with in the first years, in the first series. And so I loved that they finally picked it up in TNG and actually worked with it. He does it again in other episodes, like in The Hunted is the first one that comes to mind. He uses it again to do what needs doing, and to get themselves out of the jam too. And it's slick, and I love it. So
David?
That's a tough one. Again, I loved it from the beginning, but the two episodes, I mentioned the drumhead on our last panel. That one stays with me a lot. I think it's so relevant right now in our political climate. It's something that it still just chills me. I rewatched it recently. But the two episodes that really stick with me, the one that really made me think about hard sci-fi was Time Squared. That was the first one. I taped it. I watched it like 3 times that week, and it just made my brain spin. And the whole dilemma and the situation and how Picard deals with it. But the one Star Trek Next Generation episode that to me is, and I had to look the name up while we were talking, that honestly is probably the most important touchstone for me, is Cost of Living. And, it's kind of like it's a little bit of a throwaway episode. Lwaxana Troi comes on board. She's going to have a wedding. She's getting older. So she's willing to compromise on her Beta Z principles and won't get married naked. She's marrying a very conservative man who's obviously not right for her, but she's scared of being alone. And Alexander and her begin spending time in the holodeck because he's acting out because Worf is being Worf about fathering him. And I did the math at the time when I said, this is the first appearance she's done since Jean died. And a lot of her dialogue and a lot of her acting in that episode is coming from that place of a grieving widow. And I just thought that performance in that episode, as I get older and I start to look at, being, middle-aged and moving towards elderly, I think about that episode and I watch it sometimes just because it gives me perspective. And so that's the one that really just kind of stays with me.
Some of the episodes that I really enjoyed were later on when Worf had kind of found his footing, right? It's all the arc about, basically finding out about that his father really was not a traitor, but you've got the episode where you've got all of the survivors from Camp Kittimer. And because I'm a sick individual, my sister made me a shirt that says Camp Kittimer Batleth instructor. But looking at the couple of episodes where it is all about Worf, his brother, and honor, and seeing the political machinations and Worf standing there and making a decision that it is best for the Empire to continue to bear familial shame, and Picard having to stand there with him. But those couple of episodes, you actually get a really good picture of the Empire and their motivations, their drivers. You get to see a picture inside of what up until then had a lot of the time been not quite a cardboard cutout but you had seen the ideas of honor, you had seen a lot of the things, but you didn't see, like any government, the times when you do the things that you don't want the people to know, because the burden of honor at the end of the day becomes is not only the thing that gives you power, but it's also the thing that gives you great weight and great obligation. And I think we see a lot of those kinds of themes as we go through, sometimes with the Prime Directive, sometimes as we see things with some of the other species and interactions. When we look at some of the times we get to explore other cultures, when we get to explore running into the ways that language works, kind of like you were talking about, Nancy, and the ideas of language. So Doc, when you think about some of the different episodes and where they start going through cultural conflict, when they start going through all these interactions, is there one where you went and said, okay, yeah, they really did nail that well?
The episode where they really nailed it in terms of what again?
Well, where we get to see the representation, they really built out a culture well, and it wasn't just the we want to hit this cultural allegory, so we're going to craft the people that do this. Where, especially as we got later and the writing got better, you got to see much more about what drove a lot of the alien cultures and how they work.
As it happens, it's the episode, I was just looking up the name for it. It's The Inner Light. That's the episode where the Enterprise finds a probe and it starts transmitting, and Picard collapses, and while he's there on the floor, he basically lives an entire life as a member of this culture. And finally, when he's an old man and they're launching their first rockets into space, he realized that the rocket that's being launched is the probe that's come and broadcasting the memories and simulating this whole life, so that he becomes the vessel for that culture to take it forward into the universe because they couldn't save themselves.
Nancy?
We didn't really see a lot of the culture of the aliens in Memory Alpha, which is the Darmok and Shalad at Tanagra episode. We just saw the one that Picard was stranded with, and we saw the ones on the ship. But in just those little snippets, just by showing how they communicate, I mean, it didn't give you, this is what their culture is like. It wasn't like the one where Picard falls into that other reality and lives through that, and you see a lot about their culture. It gives you the what you need, I think, to imagine what their culture is like, to be able to kind of feel like, oh yeah, I get that, just from those little snippets of how they communicate and the bits that they use in their communication. That gives you historical context, that gives you some world building. And I feel like for a show that's only however minutes long, the originals were, with 45 minutes long with the commercial breaks, in 45 minutes, they told us about this whole other alien race that doesn't communicate the way we do, that has this history and this rich backstory. I think that was some of Trek at its best, and that's something that TNG was a lot better at the time, I would say, when compared to the original series, because I mean, you got to see the other races, and then you got to see Kirk try to bed them, and that was pretty much what you saw. But yeah, that's one where I feel like they really were able to hit the mark with world building and culture building and made it look effortless.
So
I hope that's what
Lola?
you were asking me.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. Because I mean, it's not only about the characters we see on screen that we get to know and get to love. It's also about the ones that they interact with, how we see the cultures through their eyes. So Nancy, how about you? Is there one in particular that really calls to you?
I think you meant
Me?
Lola.
I mean, Lola, sorry.
Yeah,
The other 1971 baby. Lola.
Yes, the other
that's me,
1971.
1971.
You want me to actually think and talk at the same time? Have you met me?
It's hard. I always end up just like, ugh. It's never pretty. Well, y'all got me thinking, and this is what I'm thinking. It's not totally online with what the subject is right now, but we're talking about how people evolve. And how about that episode where everybody evolved back to where their species came from? And I was thinking about how Deanna came from fish. And it's never something I thought about. I mean, I was, in my teens when that came out, and it never occurred to me, yeah, we came from, from apes, but where would other races and other planets come from? They came from fish. And I'm like, but they're not swimming. Well, originally we all swam in the ocean, but she doesn't have flippers. Well, that's, comes from hands. Hands come from flippers. And it's just amazing to see all these different species that they go back to their original and how different they are. They seem humanoid to us. Deanna seems very humanoid, but they all had these very different originations. And I always got a kick out of that.
Yeah, I did always love to see Picard be called a pygmy marmoset. How about you, Misty?
Trying to okay. I think I've figured out which. Okay, yeah. It's not one of the better episodes, story-wise, but I absolutely love Masks, which is from season 6? Oh no, season 7. It's the one where they get trapped in the retelling of a mythology of a world that is well I meant. I love it, but the critics don't usually agree with me. I love the Royale too, and apparently that's just dumb. But no, Masks I really like because of that whole mythology. They spend 45 minutes or however long the show is and give me all this mythology of this culture that no longer exists, and for just a moment it does still exist and it is still remembered because they're working through it. And I just love that one. So,
David?
Yeah, that
Well,
was one of Brent Spiner's least favorite
episodes.
episodes.
I'm sorry, David.
Oh no, it's okay. Don't worry. That was mine too. I love Mass. Mass was again, sun moon mythology, love of archaeology and how that leaks through. I feel like they could do so much with culture with that, and they can give us little hints and pieces, which is, that's how we experience other cultures, especially as tourists. I was at a destination wedding in Mexico, and we were at a resort, and one of the people at the resort asked, "How are you enjoying your time in Mexico?" And it's like, "Well, I'm not in Mexico, am I? I'm in Disney World." He said, that's very astute of you. Most people don't understand. When they think Mexico, they think this is Mexico. I'm like, this isn't Mexico. This is a very artificial place. And I feel like that's how we experience other culture when we travel, when we visit. Little pieces can leak through, but the lens of 45 minutes. So yeah, I thought Mass was such a beautiful deep dive and so rare. It was that, or I was going to have to go with ghost candle sex. So,
Sub Rosa had to be mentioned. Yes, it did.
All right, Wendy.
Oh boy, so many great episodes. I mean, one of my favorites was the Darmok and Jalad episode, which was basically to deal with a language barrier that their universal translator could not break through. It was an alien race that spoke in similes, basically. And Picard had to go down and join with the commander of the aliens, and they had to work it out and figure out how to talk to each other while some monster was trying to kill them or whatever. But I was just fascinated by the language. And being a poet, language is very important to me. And the choice of words is very important to me. And I think for that reason I loved it. But in general, I just loved the interplay and the idea that we don't have to fight each other. We can work it out. We just have to talk to each other. And I love that message. That was wonderful. But my other favorite episode is the one where Data becomes Sherlock Holmes, and the holodeck creates a adversary that could overcome, quote unquote, Data. And Geordi had put that in, thinking to basically stimmy Data pretending to be Sherlock Holmes in a very lighthearted way. And instead, the holodeck creates something that will basically take down a Starfleet officer. Be careful of, again, your word choice. But I really love that one because it touched on artificial intelligence in a time when it was very much a science fiction concept, not something that we're dealing with today as we are. But it was fascinating how this hologram became so complex that it literally came to life, and that they had to deal with it. And in the end, Picard finds a humane way to contain the problem, but respecting the new life that essentially is sprung up in his holodeck. So I really loved it for that reason too.
Rachel?
Oh man, Darmok's been taken, the Inner Light's been taken, all the classics, we're talking about world building. So I will pick a later season episode. I will pick Ensign Ro, because it was one of the first episodes that really tested post Gene Roddenberry's death, the things that you couldn't have when he was alive as part of his code. Officers couldn't be in conflict with each other. There wasn't supposed to be any disharmony in the bridge staff. And suddenly they bring in Ensign Ro, who comes from a culture that is religious, and she is a bit insubordinate, and she disagrees, and she brings a new energy. And it gives you your first look at the Bajorans, where you get to see, wow, there are some victims in the Star Trek universe, and there are people who are legit angry, and that it sets up the Maquis and how the Federation can fail sometimes in its lofty ideals. So I think in that one episode, it gives you a fundamental change in Star Trek storytelling, as well as set up a quite interesting character, a whole new species, and it leads eventually to Deep Space Nine, which is arguably narratively the strongest of the Star Trek series. So
and the whole Maquis Bajoran thing, of course, really fed strongly into Voyager as well. It's really
it did,
important.
yeah. I mean, it's a lot more important in hindsight than I think when people first saw it. And plus, Michelle Forbes, she was amazing, and it was really sad that they couldn't get her for Deep Space Nine. But then again, we wouldn't have had Kira if she had signed on. So we still won in the end.
Talking about some of these, there's a lot of really powerful arcs we saw. And then there's also some storylines that we saw a lot of that looked like it was setting up something, and then we did a left turn, or we did a right turn, or we just sort of, we're just going to work past the fact of, we've got space bugs that are trying to take over the entirety of the Federation.
Conspiracy. I'm here for it.
Man, they are just never going to close that loop. It's come back in Lower Decks, they're just never going to close that loop down.
Yeah, I always look at all the collectors, because there's always one of the little bugs on the counter, and I think they're going to pay off after the Packlids are, not the main villain.
I just keep hoping that's going to pay off one of these days, just to soothe my aching heart. But I mean, to get to watch one of the quote unquote most graphic scenes in the entirety of Star Trek. And the fact that they've now done a lot of things to edit that down. But looking at some of the times, especially after, after Gene Roddenberry died, there were a lot of shifts where they started pushing the envelope more. When we see a lot of those sorts of things, Section 31, we started to see a lot more kind of edges form where there is the big, shiny, this is the Federation. But then we kind of lose that idea that, okay, this still is a fairly militaristic society, even when you get to see those occasional trips to Earth and whatnot. So, Nancy, thinking about some of those episodes we got to see that really kind of showed some of the other parts beyond, we're on the bridge of the flagship, right? This is like the shining star, the pinnacle of, if you're in Starfleet, this is how things run. But when we got to see some of the things that happened on other ships, other worlds, other things within the Federation where it was not as running as smoothly, let's say, are there some things there that we got to see that maybe fleshed out the Federation a bit more, storylines that could have gone a lot further for us, driven a lot more out for us, things along those lines. Are there things there that, had promised that we never got to see pay off?
These are questions that are hard for me to answer because I tend to take all of Star Trek as one big long thing. And so there are episodes that I know had TNG people in them that I know are not TNG. And those are the first ones that come to mind. But one that really stuck with me in terms of things that I'm like, ugh, was, I think this is a TNG episode where they've gone back to the academy to visit. And I think they find out about Picard as a student. And there's some, it's in the context of another episode that doesn't have anything to do with the academy, really. It's, I think that Wesley and his compatriots were in trouble for doing something, and it led you back to seeing Picard as a student, which is played out later in later episodes. But just that one was like, you're trying to set this up as this utopian society, and yet here we are looking at these things that could have happened to any kid in any university setting or boarding school setting. And while those are some people's absolute favorite things, like the almost behind the scenes look at the as you said, the flagship of the Federation and these people that you should be looking up to and modeling yourself after, when you see them kind of in these other capacities, sometimes I think they were good things and sometimes they were not. And I have to say, I can't remember the name of that one. I'm sure that somebody, Rachel, Misty, somebody.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of it,
yeah,
but that's also
come up with the name of it. But also, I was in the Shut Up Wesley crowd, I will admit, after a while. I now worship the ground that Will Wheaton walks on, and I think Wesley Crusher was an amazing addition to that cast. But that episode just kind of left me like, if you're going to show us what the Academy is like, can we see something other than Wesley getting in trouble? Because we've already kind of seen a lot of that on board. So I think that would be mine. That one I felt kind of went a little sideways. But that again, that could just be me.
Yeah.
Lola?
I'm going to be honest. This is my third show tonight. I will never book 3 shows in a row. I've kind of lost the thread. But if anyone ever wants to ask me about my one interaction with Will Wheaton, I'm happy to talk to them about it. It was not pleasant. But other than that, I think I pass.
Misty?
Actually, I was thinking of one that we have Pluto TV on our TV. It's one of the free networks that you can watch older shows, and it runs Star Trek all day long, every day, as long as you want. And so I was watching an episode just last night, I think, Silicon Avatar. And in that one, we see a woman who is considered to be an expert in this silicon life form that has been destroying things, but she's really, when it all comes down to it, she ends up taking the chance at revenge instead of trying to be what Starfleet asks as an explorer and a humanity. Yeah, the crystalline entity. She's supposed to be studying, and she's supposed to be helping them communicate with it. And just as they realize that they've figured out a way to start communicating, she takes the chance for revenge and destroys it instead, and is not even sorry. And I thought that's interesting because Star Trek generally doesn't go with the whole scientists just blowing their whole careers off for one big whoop at the end. And so it was interesting to see it come from that point of view, because most of the time their scientists are all my work, and she's like, no, my revenge. Who cares about my work? So
David?
The Offspring. When you really get into the ethical question in the Federation, and you deal with this sometimes, like Measure of a Man, is data property or is data a being? And when you're dealing with these conversations around, again, I mentioned this on another panel, Star Trek to me at its best is when it's questioning what does it mean to be human, and when the characters who strive to be human who are not, the Doctor and Voyager, Seven of Nine to a large degree, Odo, and Data, of course, being the pinnacle. Those characters to me are always the most interesting, and their journeys tend to be the most compelling. But the Offspring, the ethical question, and for Data to go through that, and to see the Federation take this very, that sees the Starfleet take this very, tough choice, it definitely put an edge into, my opinion. And you see that often, again, like with the Drumhead, you see situations where there's the ship captain, Starfleet, like you said, the Enterprise, the pinnacle, the opposite of the Battlestar Galactica reboot where everybody's a mess up, which Lower Decks plays on so beautifully. But the Admiralty of Starfleet is often out of touch with boots on the ground, and the captains. And I just thought the Offspring embodied that so beautifully.
Wendy?
Oh my, there's so many choices. I think I want to revisit on Wesley Crusher a little bit, because I know some people just can't stand him. I'm actually somebody that liked him. Maybe because he was close to my age when I first started watching Star Trek. But also I think his arc interests me when he finally becomes the Traveler. And he's seeing, he always thought he would become a Starfleet officer. That's why he was on the Enterprise with his mom and trying to be worthy of all the people around him. And in the end, he turns his back on it, in a sense, and goes in a completely different direction, because he sees some of the injustice that's going on in the Federation. It's not all shiny and beautiful and perfect. There's rough scenes around the edge where he, as a Traveler, could interject himself and affect change. And I rather enjoyed that. I believe it was the last episode with him, the Traveler, and it was the Native Americans who had left Earth and had gone to a planet of their own, and they were being moved yet again, and very indicative of what has happened to our Native American cultures here in the United States. And he wanted to be a part of their solution, which I thought was very commendable. And I love Will Wheaton. I actually have met him in person too, just like Lola said. I guess I had a positive response with him. I found him to be the most hilarious speaker at the Star Trek conventions. I mean, literally, he'd have 1,000 people listening to him, and he'd have them all rolling in stitches. He was just that much of a comedian. And now, of course, seeing him on his Ready Room program, and of course, as an extra in the Big Bang Theory, I've really become quite a fan of the actor. So I don't know. So he doesn't have to shut up in my book.
Rachel?
So let me just make sure. The question is episodes where they had a plot point and it kind of went nowhere, but it was interesting. So for me, it has to be a season 7 episode that is so weird because it's pretty much forgotten. It's Force of Nature. This is the one where the twin scientists go, hey, you know that handy dandy warp drive you're using to manipulate space and go really fast? Well, it's ripping apart the subspace continuum. And it was a fascinating idea that, it brought in a lot of environmental issues of things that people depended on, but they were actually hurting the environment. And it could have been so fascinating. And it's, they say, we're going to put in new protocols that you only go warp 5 unless there's emergency. Like it was supposed to build this all up. And it's almost never mentioned again, except in Voyager, where they say that the reason Voyager's more arrowhead shaped and has the flared nacelles is that it's designed to reduce the subspace destruction. But, until you have like the burn in Discovery, you don't have any more of that. Hey, there's a cost to space travel. And I really wish they would have explored that further.
Can I just jump in on that real quick, though? Because like cruise ships, right? That always made my brain think about this kind of environmental impact of what it takes. Or, there's the whole conspiracy theory about contrails, but we have learned that while contrails aren't that a thing, the igniting of the fuel at that high atmosphere is a real problem in our environment. But that wormhole, the Barzai, that's Non in Discovery. She's Barzan. And so they do come back. And the Ferengi in that episode that went through, because it was an unstable wormhole, Voyager does encounter those Ferengi later.
They do. Yeah, I remember that now. It did like individual points played off, but I really would have thought if it was that dramatic and that destructive, it should have been more of a plot point, because every single episode they're at like, we're going warp 9, warp 10, we're chasing a Borg cube. Maybe the Borg with their transwarp conduits address this some, but yeah, I just thought it would be more important.
I have to say though, I think it kind of was, because that was the whole point. We're going to put in limited things, but we're not really going to do anything about it. We know it's a problem, but we're not going to really do anything about it. And I think that was kind of the point,
that is kind of the 90s in a nutshell, isn't it?
Say that every time in all these future iterations, every time they mention going anything over like warp 5, my brain goes, wait a minute, that's not good. Don't do that. I don't really remember why, but don't do that.
But it's that episode. That is the reason why.
So it's still there. I mean, it still crops up. You're right. They could have done a little more Star Trek is so heavy-handed and in a good way about so many environmental issues. And that one just kind of went, you just put that away.
Yep.
Doc?
So as the way I remember your question was, you're talking about episodes that showed Starfleet as not exactly being the utopia it was originally made out to be. But that was a while ago. So I'm going to answer that question.
However you want to answer it now, Doc.
And I'm what I'm thinking of is the episode The Wounded, which was where you had I've forgotten his name.
O'Brien.
It was about O'Brien, and it brought back the captain of the Rutledge that O'Brien used to serve under, and dealt with Cardassians because there had been a war between the Federation and the Cardassians. And just so much of this, the Federation was so evolved and progressive, and we don't settle our differences with violence, except, oh yeah, we had a war with the Cardassians. And it wasn't just a war, it was a really dirty war. And there are a bunch of people who are still really screwed up about it. And
when they sing the song together, I go to pieces every time. But
one of the best lines for me was when O'Brien was saying, I don't hate you, Cardassian. I hate what I became because of you. And that just shows that even with all the high idealism, Starfleet has trouble hitting the mark. It's something that all the humans still have to work on.
Well, and I think that's actually a pretty good spot to wrap up on for the night. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys, website, social media, if you've got that latest release you want to let everybody know about. So, Wendy, you're up first.
Here I am, first again. Woohoo! Anyway, my name is Wendy Van Camp. I am the Poet Laureate for the city of Anaheim, California. I'm a speculative poet and a science fiction author. You can find my books on Amazon and all places where you can buy books. I recently had another anthology come out. I'm an editor of speculative poetry. Many of the top names in speculative poetry, and that's science fiction, fantasy, and horror-themed poems. They all came out for my book. I'm very proud of it. And of course, I'm biased being the editor. But it is available on Amazon. It just dropped about a week ago. And it's the fourth, this is my fourth year editing the book. So come on out and have a look at it and get an idea of what speculative poetry actually is. You can find me at my website, which is wendyvancamp.com. I do have a newsletter / Ramblecast where I give out writing tips, show off my poem of the month, and do a little ramble about whatever occurs to me, and who knows where we go in that direction. And it's fun because I'm doing my very first podcast doing that. I voice over my newsletter. So I haven't completely put you off to the sound of my voice, go ahead and listen to that. But anyway, you can find it at nowastedink.substack.com. And thank you.
Rachel?
Alrighty then. I am the one, the only, the R.E. Carr, author of urban fantasy, science fiction, and who knows what else? Horror comedy. That's the other thing I write. You can find me at www.racheleccarr.com because remember, the other Rachel Carr writes vegan cookbooks. If you want to find me on social media, look up Total Recar, always a favorite. And my newest book, False Icons Book 4, Deviant Dark Dryads, is set to drop in May of 2023. So pick it up on Amazon or wherever unfined books are sold.
Doc?
All right. I'm Doc Coleman. I write about mad science, manners, and mayhem. If you want to find my stuff, just go to your favorite search engine and search for Doc Coleman Steampunk. That will help you find my website, doccoleman.com. It'll help you find my Amazon author page, where you can see samples of my published works and decide if they're right for you. And my latest publishing is I was one of the contributors for eSpec Books, A Cast of Crows, which we just launched it at the beginning of April at the Telltale Steampunk convention, but I think it's not officially out until October. But we've got a number of convention appearances where you can still find and buy the book and get it signed.
Nancy?
I am Nancy E. Dunn, fantasy author, multi-genre fantasy author. You can find me at my creatively named website, nancyedunn.com. And I am all over social media because apparently that's the way I think I'm going to sell 1 million books, and that's the way to do marketing. At Nancy D_writes, just in case people forgot what I do. I have a new book that just came out yesterday, which is my one and only foray into urban fantasy. That's Storm. And you can find links to that. I have excerpts from my book, so you can see kind of what you're getting into before you get into it on my website. And I have a blog, which is Isn't the Lettuce Brave, which is also linked to my website.
Lola?
My name is Lola Lariscy. You can visit my website, lolalariscy.com. I write science fiction, and I'm just about everywhere on the internet.
Misty?
I'm Misty Massey. You can find me at mistymassey.com. I'm about as creative as Nancy. And I tweet, I face, I TikTok. I am looking at other social media options, but right now those are the 3 that I hang out on most. If you want to find my books, I am, of course, on Amazon, where you can get the Mad Kestrel series of pirate fantasy adventures, including the Palmetto Scribe Award-winning Kestrel's Dance.
And David?
I'm David R. Slayton. You can find me at davidslayton.com. I'm still on Twitter as long as it holds together. Social media, I'm pretty much everywhere. And if you just Google White Trash Warlock, I should pop right up. So my urban fantasy series with Adam Binder, White Trash Warlock, is out there everywhere. And I have Dark Moon Shallow Sea out on Halloween this year. So October 31st, it's up for pre-order. And my gay, geeky rom-com To Catch a Geek is out on the Kiss app from Crazy Maple Studios in June.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the Speculative Fiction Academy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And now we're going to turn out those 4 lights and have a good night.